Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate. Just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
Millennials don't wear watches. It's true. Apple Watch is not a watch, sweetheart. Checking your emails on your wrist is a cry for help. We're on the beach. I see Leo with a black watch. I go, Leo, what time is it? Because it doesn't tell you the time. Your watch doesn't tell you the time. It's not a watch. It's a Whoop. A Whoop? What does it tell you? It tells you how you're doing. I said, well, I look at my wrist, I see a gold Rolex. I know I'm doing good.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Trump Tuesday, September the 24th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Donald Trump. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now a little bit of Varney and Company.
And you wonder how the head of Iran is going to be received, right? I mean, he's going to give a speech as well. We had to get him a visa, and we did it to come to go to the UN General Assembly. Let's see how he's received.
Yep, and he's hobnobbing around this city, and it's disgusting.
With the Chinese.
Oh. Yep.
Wow. All right. Great show, everybody. Michael Lee, Tricia McLaughlin, Cheryl Casoni. We will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here. Barney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. This is a big day in politics. It's a big day for investors, too, because the rally modestly continues. The election, though, and the war, that's what's making the headlines. President Biden addresses world leaders at the United Nations 1 hour from now. Reportedly, he will promote what he calls real achievements for the American people and the world. And as he's saying that, Israel continues its attacks against Hezbollah. Thousands are fleeing South Lebanon, hundreds killed. It's very close to full-scale war, diplomacy on the sidelines. Little fallout for stocks, but gold remains at or near record highs, $2,650 an ounce. Oil holding at $72 a barrel. Stocks reacting, there's crude oil at $72. Now, stocks, they're reacting to the Fed's rate cut. The rally continues. It's very modest this morning, but the Dow is up in the green, 70 points higher. Nasdaq up 37, and the S&P up 6. Again, not much, but a little green. It continues. Treasury yields at elevated levels. The 10-year coming in at 3.79. The 2-year, same story, at elevated levels. That's coming in at 3.61%. Bitcoin, I'll call it firm at $63,000 per coin. Let's get to politics. Today, Donald Trump outlines his latest tax proposals. He's speaking in Georgia. So far, he says, no tax on tips, Social Security benefits, and overtime. He wants a cap of 10% on credit card interest, and he wants to restore the deduction for state and local taxes. We don't yet know what he'll come up with in Georgia. Kamala Harris will visit the border probably on Friday. Her current position is that the border crisis is Trump's fault. A video has surfaced from 2018 showing her chanting, "Up with education, down, down with deportation." She was at a parade in Los Angeles calling for an end to all deportations. Where does she stand now? On the show today, New York City, really in crisis. The scandals that surround Mayor Adams are widening, and the police charge that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua has taken over the migrant shelters and are operating a citywide criminal operation. They cannot be sent back. Venezuela won't take them. Tuesday, September 24th, 2024, Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was Varney and Company. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bill Maher.
New rule, now that we've shown that it's possible to begin a campaign for president just 3 months before the election, let's always do that. Yeah. They always say voters don't pay attention until Labor Day. Well, then let's start the election on Labor Day and end it on Election Day. When the Civil War starts. But I'll get to that in a minute. But honestly, what sentient person couldn't cast their vote right now? Trump announced his run nearly 2 years ago. Did anyone say, good, I need to hear more about this Donald Trump? If he can support forcing a woman to choose whether to have an abortion in 6 weeks, we can choose whether or not to abort him in 12. Americans are a funny people. For most things, we have zero attention span. Nearly half of TikTok users say watching videos that last over a minute is stressful. 37 states have no waiting period for a gun because if we order a pizza and it's not there in 30 minutes, someone has to die. If you order a garden gnome when you're drunk on Amazon, it's on your doorstep before you sober up. 5-minute car washes, speed dating, 15-minute oil change, 20-minute facelifts. A 2005 survey found that vaginal sex typically lasts 3 to 7 minutes because we fuck like we eat. And yet we do elections like we're fucking on cocaine. When Joe Biden was still hanging on to be the candidate, many of the pundits said that to switch him out this late would cause chaos. Yeah, that was never my position. And indeed, what happened was Kamala Harris said, "Oh, look, I guess it's my turn." And the next day, a grateful nation handed her $500 million. The only reason we stay stuck in permanent campaign mode is money. It's estimated this year that $16 billion will be spent on political ads. It's time we admit that the endless campaign exists only to enrich advertisers, political consultants, and what's left of the news media. And the fact that we're just getting to know Kamala isn't bad. It's great. Great for her, great for the country. People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of. They're just constantly on us. TV, radio, the mail, on our phones, texting. Hey, Bill, Tim Wall's here. You up? They're everywhere all the time. Jesus Christ, fuck off. Let mommy put her purse down. I don't get it. Everything in the modern world moves so fast, except politics. It's the one exception. Well, politics and streaming series. People are always telling me I should binge watch a show that gets good in season 3. Season 3? What about my needs? Every idea that would make one single decent movie is now a 10-part series, and the middle 3 episodes are just the old cop with a dark secret and the lesbian cop with the neck tattoo saying, "Are you as confused as I am?" Very confused. Why the hell do we still need a ridiculous 11-week period between election and inauguration? It made sense in the old days when it took that long to get from Illinois to Washington by horse, but we have planes now. We don't have to strap William Howard Taft to a buckboard and wheel his ass in from Ohio. We talk of the intermission between election and inauguration as a transition period, like that's good and it makes us mature. It's not. It's a fetid swamp which breeds nothing but mischief. When other countries vote out their politicians, they throw their clothes right out on the front lawn within days. Bye-bye, loser. You don't get 3 months to sit there and think about rioting. Where else in life does this ever happen, where a person gets terminated and they just let you stay on for a couple of months? No. When you get fired at Google, you pack up your cardboard box with the sad plant and you're gone that day. Canada elects a new prime minister and they take over in 2 weeks. The French hit it and quit it in 3. Japan's season lasts 12 days. In England, their campaign is 25 working days, and the new prime minister moves into 10 Downing Street within hours. In Mexico and the Philippines, campaigns last 90 days. In Brazil, 45. And these are the laid-back countries. The ones where you ask room service for a bucket of ice and it comes as you're boarding the flight home. Yet they all managed to wrap up an election in the same amount of time that it takes a 90-day fiancé to say, sure, I'll fuck a fat guy for a green card. If TLC can do 90-day fiancé, we can do 90-day commander-in-chief.
Thank you. Now, the patriotic short.
How easy is it to take down the world's largest aircraft carrier? The USS Gerald R. Ford is one of mankind's greatest engineering achievements. This thing weighs a whopping 100,000 tons and can fit 90 aircraft on its 337-meter-long flight deck. That's the equivalent of 3.7 football pitches end to end. However, that makes it a big target. So to defend itself, it houses 3 phalanx close-in weapon systems capable of firing 75 rounds a second, deleting any aircraft or missiles from as far as 1.75 miles away. A further 2 RIM 162 evolved Sea Sparrow missile launchers designed to take out supersonic anti-ship missiles, 2 further RIM 116 RAM systems, 4 times MK38 26mm machine gun systems, and lastly 4 M250 caliber machine guns. But if that isn't enough, it rolls deep in the carrier group, with each ship having its own specialized weaponry, not to mention all the aircraft on board. Yeah, it's safe to say this thing's pretty much untouchable.
And that was the patriotic short. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, some motivation.
There is no testimony without a trial. It is supposed to be hard. That rough process is necessary. It's what makes you who you are.
You've got to be flexible, you've got to be versatile, and you've got to be adaptable. You've got to deal with circumstances such as you find them. Why? Because a lot of stuff is going to be thrown at you. Many times you're not going to have time to prepare. Sometimes people come out of nowhere with stuff, and you've got to stand up inside of yourself and handle it. You got to trust that you're going to be all right. You have no evidence to support it. It doesn't make sense. You can't point anything to say, well, this is why. There's no logic in it. There's no way in which you can logically and practically and realistically support it and prove it. That's why you got to have faith and you got to have trust. Somehow, some way, you got to have that you're going to come through. What is it that will make it worth it for you to face the rejections when you want to give up and things are working against you? What is it that will make it worth it for you to brainstorm and not be intimidated and say, I can do this? What is it that will make it worth it for you to raise the bar on yourself and say, I got some more stuff in me? What is it that will help you get back up again?
You better go inside. You still looking outside for the stuff that's already inside. You still looking for someone to save you when you already your superhero. You looking for some information from somebody when you already got what you need in your head. It's just time for you to get up and be the best version of you. When you get your butt knocked out, the only way you can get back up is from the inside out. I got what it takes. I got average skill, but I got phenomenal will. I can. I have the ability to do it. I will. I have the willpower to make it happen. I must. Somebody count on me. Arise. Get your butt up. You don't belong at the bottom, and it's time for you to get your butt from down there. It's time for you to stop being comfortable at the bottom. Get your butt up and get to where you're supposed to be. This ain't time to be whining. This ain't time to be crying. This is time to get focused. Once you start questioning yourself, you're already lost. Once you start questioning yourself, once you start going into a state of depression, and you start being by yourself, and you start thinking and wondering, once you start wondering, you already lost. Even if you don't believe.
You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your product. You have to believe in your service. And you have to sell you every day. The biggest sale that I make every day that Les Brown, you can do this. I can beat this. If other people can do it, then it's possible that I can do it. You're going to break records. You're going to do some things when you challenge yourself, when you work on yourself, because you don't get in life what you want, you get in life what you are. If you want to improve your income, you want to improve your circumstances, you want to improve your life, you got to first improve yourself. Spend more time on yourself than what you've been spending. Working on yourself, talking to yourself, overcoming the negative conversation, that inner dialogue that's going on all the time. It's very important. You owe that to yourself. And so learning how to empower yourself, you've got to learn to make a conscious, deliberate, determined effort to stand up inside yourself. Working on yourself, watching that inner dialogue, it will determine the quality of your life. Because you are creating your own production. You are the star of your show. You are the director. You're writing the script. And you will determine whether your life is a smash office hit or flop. You begin to realize that your dream and your gifts have so much meaning and so much value for you till your hunger for them will begin to push you past the fear. Your hunger to have them will give you a special drive. You want to become a risk taker. You want to raise the bar on yourself. Most people won't do that.
Most people are gonna think you're weird. They're gonna think you're crazy.
People are going to think you're crazy. Get away from people in your life that's hate. Get away from your family members that ain't ever opened a business. Get away from your family members that ain't ever followed their dream. Get away from them. Don't expect people to understand you. Don't expect it to make sense to anybody why you've got to do this. There's some people that won't like you. Who do you think you are? You are arrogant. What do you think you can do? You think you can get away with that?
I'm fighting with folks who not even fighting, but they got something to say about how we fight. You're not even fighting. You ain't doing nothing. And for those of us who get up and go out, you got something to say about how we do what we do it. Stop talking to us who perform. Stop critiquing us. Stop telling us what to do and how to do it.
Build the kind of life that says, I told you so, without having to say a fucking word. Every fucking negative comment should trigger you into productive action. Every time somebody says something to you, you should go do whatever it is that is going to make them have to eat their words. Right then, right now.
I've had my haters. I've had people who've come against me, who try to sabotage me.
I'm like the lion. I'm not the gazelle. I don't need something external to motivate me. I find something within.
That's what lions do. Lions don't cry. Lions don't give up. Lions don't quit. Lions hunt. That's what we do for a living.
I must be the greatest, not because I'm cocky, but I gotta tell myself I'm the best if I'm gonna be the best. I gotta believe in me before anybody else believe in me.
Thank you. And now, meditation. And that was meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic and Bishop Robert Barron and the Ayn Rand Thought of the Day.
One day it will all make sense. Whenever you find yourself blaming Providence, turn it around in your mind, and you will see that what has happened is in keeping with reason. Epictetus, Discourses, 3.17.1. Part of the reason we fight against the things that happen is that we're so focused on our plan that we forget that there might be a bigger plan we don't know about. Is it not the case that plenty of times something we thought was a disaster turned out to be, with the passage of time, a lucky break? We also forget that we're not the only people who matter, and that our loss might be someone else's gain. This sense of being wronged is a simple awareness problem. We need to remember that all things are guided by reason, but that it is a vast and universal reason that we cannot always see. That the surprise hurricane was the result of a butterfly flapping its wings a hemisphere away, or that misfortune we have experienced is simply the prelude to a pleasant and enviable future.
Is the fullness of salvation on offer only in Jesus? Yes. But are there participations in that fullness on offer in other religions? And there the answer is yes. As you look at Buddhism or Hinduism, or you look at Islam or Judaism, can we see rays of light? Yeah. Elements of truth and goodness and beauty in them. How should we read those? As participations in the fullness of light found in Jesus Christ. Now press it further. Can one find salvation even by means of these lesser lights? And the answer of the Council Fathers is yes. I'm not saying, oh, don't worry about it. Everyone's going to be saved. No, that's not the point at all. Can someone be saved? By the grace of Christ, offered in a participated way in these other traditions. And the answer is yes, it's possible.
Your subconscious is like a computer, more complex a computer than men can build, and its main function is the integration of your ideas. Who programs it? Your conscious mind. If you default, if you don't reach any firm convictions, your subconscious is programmed by chance, and you deliver yourself into the power of ideas you do not know you have accepted, unquote. Ayn Rand, from Philosophy Who Needs It, and the book, Philosophy Who Needs It. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
From The Wiles of War. The idiom represents an archetype in world literature, a person with a smiling face and a cruel heart, dubbed a smiling tiger in Chinese folklore. And lastly, from Strategies of Psychotherapy by J. Haley. It is not pathological to attempt to gain control of a relationship. We all do this. But when one attempts to gain that control while denying it, then such a person is exhibiting symptomatic behavior. In any relationship that stabilizes, such as that between a husband and wife, the two people work out agreements about who is to control what area of the relationship. A relationship becomes psychopathological when one of the two people will maneuver to circumscribe the other's behavior, while indicating he is not. The wife in such a relationship will force her husband to take care of the house in such a way that she denies she is doing so. She may, for example, have obscure dizzy spells, an allergy to soap, or various types of attacks which require her to lie down regularly. Such a wife is circumscribing her husband's behavior while denying that she is doing this. After all, she cannot help her dizzy spells. When one person circumscribes the behavior of another while denying that he is doing so, the relationship begins to be rather peculiar. For example, when a wife requires her husband to be home every night because she has anxiety attacks when she is left alone, he cannot acknowledge that she is controlling his behavior because she is not requiring him to be home. The anxiety is, and her behavior is, involuntary. Neither can he refuse to let her control his behavior for the same reason.
And that was the end of Chapter 32, Dominate While Seeming Not to. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you should vote Republican because today's society increasingly divests itself of the negativity of the other or the foreign. The process of globalization accelerates the dissolution of borders and distinctions. Yet, the depletion of negativity should not be equated with the disappearance of violence, since along with the violence of negativity, there's a violence of positivity, which is wielded without enmity or domination. Violence isn't merely an excess of negativity. It can also be an excess of positivity. The accumulation of the positive, which manifests as overachievement, overproduction, overcommunication, hyperattention, and hyperactivity. The violence of positivity is possibly even more disastrous than that of negativity because it is neither visible nor evident, and it evades immunological defense because of its positivity. Infection, invasion, and infiltration, which are characteristic of the violence of negativity, now give way to infarction. Back in a minute. Thank you. You must frame the argument correctly if you want to win. Describing the people that live on the street as homeless is wrong. Homelessness describes people that are victims, people that have no place to live because of catastrophic events that are beyond their control. The people that live on the street are self-destructive and should be properly described as trespassers or vagrants or squatters or even bums. Migrants is wrong. Animals migrate. Human beings immigrate and emigrate. People that come to our country are immigrants, and if they have cheated to get here, they are illegal immigrants. Describing a mass murder as a mass shooting is incorrect. A mass shooting is what happens at a gun range. A mass murder is what happens at an elementary school. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the conclusion of Speechless by Michael Knowles.
Conclusion. Back to Methuselah. Listen, the serpent instructed Eve. I will tell you a great secret. I am very subtle, and I have thought and thought and thought, and I am very willful, and must have what I want, and I have willed and willed and willed, and I have eaten strange things, stones and apples, that you are afraid to eat. President Kennedy never borrowed that diabolical line from George Bernard Shaw's play Back to Methuselah, nor did any of the politicians whom Kennedy inspired in the decades that followed. But the socialist playwright's reflection on subtlety, contemplation, and willfulness helps to explain how the serpent and his own ideological heirs have been able to implement their dream of things that never were. Political correctness did not spring into existence all at once, nor did stupid people accidentally foist it upon us. Subtle thinkers have imposed this new speech code upon society over the course of many decades, trading the fruits of our cultural inheritance for the forbidden fruit of its inversion. As we have seen, even scholars sympathetic to political correctness acknowledge that the phrase derives from the rhetoric of communists, who embrace, in the words of Whittaker Chambers, the great alternative faith of mankind. The Chinese communist leader Mao Zedong popularized the notion of political correctness with the official translation of his Little Red Book into English in 1966. But Western Marxists had introduced the concepts that came to constitute political correctness decades earlier. In 1843, Karl Marx called for the ruthless criticism of all that exists. His most influential disciples understood that political revolution required cultural upheaval, which in turn demanded the disillusionment of the people with the prevailing culture. Georg Lukács advanced this effort through his writings and as cultural minister of the short-lived Hungarian Soviet Republic. Herbert Marcuse, Erich Fromm, Max Horkheimer, and other intellectuals of the Frankfurt School contributed to the campaign by developing an entire academic discipline oriented toward critiquing and transforming society rather than merely understanding it. They called this approach, fittingly, critical theory. Preeminent among these thinkers and statesmen was Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Communist Party leader who bequeathed to Western Marxism the concept of cultural hegemony, the subtle and pervasive mode by which a ruling class controls society. Gramsci proposed two strategies for achieving hegemony: wars of maneuver and wars of position. The former entailed direct confrontation between the revolutionary and the established value systems. The latter involved the subtler strategy of infiltrating the institutions that shape culture. The first rumblings of this cultural upheaval occurred largely out of public view, but a handful of political prophets sensed the shift, George Orwell and Aldous Huxley most notable among them. Orwell, a democratic socialist, envisioned a dystopian future in which the totalitarian regime controlled its subjects' thoughts through the manipulation of language, historical revision, and outright censorship. When social media platforms censored and deplatformed the sitting president of the United States in January of 2021, Orwell's 1984 rose once again to the top of the bestseller charts, more than 7 decades after it debuted. Orwell's teacher, Aldous Huxley, envisioned a different sort of dystopian future, in which the dominant regime ruled not through the suppression of its subjects' desires, but rather through the encouragement of their basest appetites. The world state, in Brave New World, plies its people with drugs and casual sex to keep them placated and submissive. Sex and drugs took center stage during the cultural upheavals of the 1960s, but behind the scenes, two influential thinkers returned to the fray. The long-dead Antonio Gramsci helped to guide the revolution from the grave through student radicals such as Rudi Dutschke, who restyled Gramsci's War of Position as a long march through the institutions, which Dutschke believed would provide the radicals with the cultural hegemony required to enforce their political vision. At the same time, Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School re-emerged as the father of the New Left through a series of popular and provocative books and essays. Marcuse's most infamous essay from that period called for a system of repressive tolerance, according to which right-wing arguments would be censored and leftist ideas encouraged. Marcuse believed that conservatives' cultural hegemony had endowed the oppressed masses with a false consciousness that left them ignorant of their own oppression. True liberation required the destruction of the old moral order, which could only be achieved through the censorship of conservative thought and speech. As we have seen, the second-wave feminists of the 1970s attempted to overcome this false consciousness by hosting consciousness-raising meetings, during which previously well-adjusted women discovered new reasons to complain. The women's newfound grievances against their husbands and children might have seemed beyond the reach of politics, but, according to these feminists and their leader, Carol Hanisch, the personal is political. Only by opening the most intimate details of their private lives to public scrutiny did these women believe they could effect political change. Like Marcuse, many of these feminists did not think liberation could be left to chance, but rather had to be coerced. The French feminist Simone de Beauvoir, for instance, wanted to prohibit women from staying home and raising their own children. If women had that choice, she believed, they would take it, and domestic life did not conduce to liberation. Beauvoir wanted to force women to be free. At the same time that Marcuse enthralled aggrieved women on the coasts, the broader Frankfurt School project of critical theory began to take over the American university. The radical movement colonized traditional academic disciplines such as history and literature, but it also established new fields of study. Black studies, women's studies, and queer studies departments sprang up on campuses around the country. The literary critic Harold Bloom dubbed these pseudo-disciplines collectively the School of Resentment, and many conservatives refer to them as grievance studies. The academic reformers presented their efforts as a means of making curricula more inclusive, but they soon revealed their exclusionary agenda. Notably, when Jesse Jackson led a march down Stanford's campus chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." In the decades that followed, these intellectual vandals defended their perversions of curricula on the grounds of academic freedom, a dubious concept that conservatives such as William F. Buckley Jr. once dismissed as a hoax, although his political heirs came to embrace the notion in a cultural retreat that exemplifies the era. Once the radicals had conquered the academic side of the university, they turned their attention to the administration, which they accused of tolerating a climate of racial hatred and widespread rape. Bogus statistics gave the reformers' claims a scientific sheen, and a series of high-profile hoaxes kept the narrative in the news. To remedy these contrived evils, the student radicals demanded draconian codes to regulate speech and behavior on campus, as well as kangaroo courts to mete out mob justice. In the spring of 1991, President George H.W. Bush addressed the growing issue of political correctness by name during a commencement speech at the University of Michigan, which had seen its own draconian speech code overturned by a federal court 2 years earlier. After joking about the mob of leftist students that had gathered to heckle him, Bush declared, "The notion of political correctness has ignited controversy across the land and replaces old prejudice with new ones." But President Bush kept most of his focus overseas on the collapse of the Soviet Union, the ending of the Cold War, and the development of America's economic and military might. He chose largely to ignore the culture wars that were heating up at home. 2 months later, Bush's nomination of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court made political correctness a matter of national political importance, after Thomas's former colleague Anita Hill alleged that the judge had sexually harassed her over the course of their long working relationship across multiple government agencies. Sex scandals have been the undoing of a great many politicians, but Hill's claims did not involve sex, only speech. Regardless, no one corroborated Hill's charges on the record before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and several former colleagues of Thomas and Hill contradicted her claims. Ultimately, Thomas put an end to the national circus by turning political correctness against his opponents, whom he accused of perpetrating a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deigned to think for themselves. The attacks on Thomas convinced prominent playwright David Mamet to produce Oleana, the first high-profile work of art to confront political correctness by name. The play depicts the confusion that arises from the rapid transformation of speech and behavior codes, as well as the cynical way in which political radicals can exploit those shifting standards. Contrary to the claims of many conservatives, political correctness did not trade free speech for censorship so much as it traded one set of standards for another, each with its own taboos. The ancient Israelites prohibited utterance of the holy name. Politically correct moderns censor Mark Twain's use of the N-word in Huckleberry Finn. The traditional liturgical calendar dedicates February, March, and June to the Holy Family, St. Joseph, and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, respectively. The liturgical calendar of secular liberalism dedicates those months to Black history, women's history, and pride, once considered the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins, elevated by political correctness throughout the 1990s and 2000s, notably through the War on Christmas, an assault on traditional religion that the cultural revolutionaries alternately denied and downplayed. They sued cities to remove nativity displays, and then gaslit conservatives into believing the whole campaign was a figment of their imaginations. When those transformative efforts became impossible to deny, the same radicals insisted that the changes were insignificant, unworthy of conservatives' outrage. In the second decade of the 21st century, politically correct reformers justified their demands that grown men be permitted use of women's bathrooms and changing rooms with the same no-big-deal attitude. But if the rise of transgender ideology did not constitute a major cultural shift, why did leftists expend so much time, effort, and treasure promoting it? Gender dysphoria afflicts only a small number of people, but the thorough liberation that the radicals sought required overcoming not merely the oppressive constraints of culture, but even the bounds of nature itself. The gender ideologues justified their demands with pseudo-scientific jargon, and prominent scientists lent an air of authority to the radicals' political claims. Ironically, as political correctness politicized the most private and intimate aspects of citizens' lives, it simultaneously narrowed the scope of politics by declaring left-wing views scientific and therefore beyond the realm of legitimate debate. In the 1970s, Science had determined that the Earth was headed for a new ice age, and therefore we must reorder society and government to avert disaster. When global cooling reversed course and became global warming over the ensuing decades, science demanded the same solutions to avoid the opposite calamity. Politically correct reformers undermined the old standards by appealing to free speech and inveighing against censorship. But no sooner had the radicals cracked the old moral order than they began to enforce a new standard of speech with all the force and rigidity they once claimed to oppose. Political correctness reached its apotheosis during the early weeks of 2021, when corporate enforcers of the new standards took the liberty of censoring the duly elected President of the United States. Conservatives have failed to thwart political correctness because they mistake it for a campaign of censorship against free speech, rather than a contest between two competing sets of standards and behavior. But even this description does not do justice to the cleverness of political correctness, which aims less to erect new standards than to destroy the old ones. Political correctness may be understood in this way to be a sort of anti-standard standard, which succeeds just as surely by persuading people to abandon standards altogether, for instance in the name of free speech absolutism, as it does by impelling acquiescence to its ever-changing dictates. Politically correct radicals may demand that society redefine marriage on the grounds that sex and desire are innate and immutable, or they may justify their plan on the grounds that sex is socially constructed, and there are no such things as men or women. The premises on which the radicals base their demands may contradict one another, but no matter which justification they choose, the traditional conception of marriage must be destroyed. In fact, the insistence on mutually contradictory rationales actually furthers the radicals' ends by rendering people, in George Orwell's words, unwilling and unable to think too deeply on any subject whatsoever. Orwell called this tactic doublethink, and he credited it with enabling regimes to arrest the course of history. As we have seen, conservatives have mustered two responses, both of which have only accelerated the progress of the radicals' campaign. The most conciliatory conservatives have simply gone along, ceding one piece of the culture after another to political correctness. Their more curmudgeonly brethren have refused to abide by political correctness, but nonetheless have effectively tolerated it on broadly liberal grounds. Free speech absolutists have refused to acknowledge that liberty entails limits, retreating instead to skeptical platitudes upholding licentiousness, which previous generations of conservatives, including the Founding Fathers, understood to be the very opposite of liberty. William F. Buckley Jr. denounced this sort of political cowardice in God and Men at Yale, when he observed, "Skepticism has utility only when it leads to conviction." Unfortunately, since Buckley's time, conservatives have lost their conviction, appealing to a neutral liberal order that never existed. Too many conservatives have become liberals, as Richard Weaver defined the liberal, someone who doubts his premises even while he is acting on them. In the words of Yeats, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. The old standards never stood a chance. Conservatives may perhaps recover some of their squandered cultural inheritance, but any such hope requires changing course. First and foremost, conservatives must ditch the tired slogans that they have parroted for decades. There has never been any such thing as absolute free speech, and conservatives' delusions to the contrary have afforded radicals the opportunity to dismantle the traditional moral order that conservatives purport to uphold. Thus far, while I have enjoined conservatives to expend less energy defending the abstract right of free speech and to focus more on using that right to say something substantive, I have intentionally avoided prescribing precisely what we ought to say. That topic deserves its own volume, if not several, and I will not attempt to tack on a new conservative governing philosophy as a coda to this study of political correctness. But so as not to be charged with evading the question entirely, I will offer some general principles. Any substantive conservative vision must begin with an acknowledgement of moral conscience, which is a judgment of reason whereby we recognize the moral quality of concrete acts. This acknowledgement requires the further recognition that good, evil, virtue, and vice are not mere sentiments or superstitions, but eternal realities. We can know this fact through the application of right reason and by the light of revelation, neither of which conservatives can afford to forego in crafting a political vision, no matter how implausible radicals make both guides to action out to be. As a prudential matter, Conservatives must begin their case against political correctness with the practical tradition of free speech as it has existed in America. Such a defense would require that conservatives admit the necessity of just and prudent censorship. In particular, we would need to restore prohibitions against obscenity, which politically correct radicals have long exploited to arouse the people's base passions and undermine their liberty, just as the Founding Fathers feared. Vague harangues against cancel culture miss the mark because they fail to acknowledge the justice of ostracizing certain people and marginalizing certain ideas. All cultures cancel. In the 1950s, American society canceled communists. In the 2020s, it cancels anti-communists. If conservatives hope to recover anything akin to traditional standards, they must not only articulate a moral and political vision, but also suppress ideologies and organizations that would subvert that vision. But what exactly do conservatives hope to defend and restore? Even popular panegyrics to Western civilization will not suffice. Both Marxism and Albigensianism arose from within Western civilization, yet one suspects conservatives would rather not reestablish either of those ideologies. The tree of Western civilization includes many divergent branches. An effective campaign to disestablish political correctness must be specific about which aspects of Western civilization we hope to re-emphasize and restore. In the spring of 2019, conservative writer Sohrab Ahmari published a controversial op-ed in which he denounced autonomy-maximizing liberalism and called for a public square reordered to the common good and ultimately to the highest good. If conservatives hope to offer an alternative to the new social standard of political correctness, we must first admit that there is such a thing as the common good, that consequently there must be such a thing as the highest good, and that both the common good and the highest good have played a significant role in the American political tradition. We must then articulate a plausible vision of both the common and highest good. Contrary to popular and hysterical fears of theocracy, all regimes necessarily recognize and pursue some conception of the good. Political correctness has promoted various slogans as euphemisms to just such an effect. Most recently, it has exalted diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it has installed deans and vice presidents of diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus, in government agencies, and throughout corporate America to perform the sorts of religious and ethical functions once reserved for chaplains and the episcopacy. When conservatives eschew any political vision of the good, we do not leave each individual free to pursue his own conscience in the supposedly neutral and value-free playing ground of secular liberalism, as many seem to believe. Instead, we give our ideological foes free rein to define and enforce their opposite vision of the good, to which everyone will ultimately be forced to submit, or else face censorship and ostracism, as we see occurring now in real time. One wonders whether conservatives' reluctance to articulate and enforce a political vision of the good derives from their lack of interest in practicing what they would preach. People who do not go to church have little credibility in encouraging others to practice formal religion. People who have never cracked the spine of the Iliad or the Aeneid cannot persuasively recommend a return to the classics. As political thinkers from Aristotle to the Founding Fathers well understood, virtue is a habit, and no conservative can hope to conserve what he does not himself practice. It has become fashionable in recent decades to describe America as an idea. The United States has a creedal aspect to its character, but it is also a real country with geography, traditions, and people. On the 4th of July, we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, but we also cook hot dogs and drink beer. We contemplate our rights and liberties, but we also remember the specific people and events that have brought us to our present moment. The performance of cherished, inherited rituals is a sturdier defense against the schemes of cultural revolutionaries than a lifetime of abstract philosophizing. Political correctness has advanced less through abstract theorizing than through practical politics. Gramsci, the godfather of political correctness, founded and led a political party. His intellectual heirs colonized established institutions, from university campuses to corporate boardrooms. Even the academic Marcuse worked for the precursor to the CIA. When one faddish ideology ceases to suit their practical purposes, the cultural revolutionaries trade it for another, regardless of the contradiction between, for instance, feminism and transgenderism. For all of their theorizing, the politically correct radicals of the past century always seemed to prioritize the exercise of power over philosophical purity. For too long, conservatives have taken Andrew Breitbart's maxim that politics is downstream of culture as an excuse to disengage from the political process and squander the power that voters sometimes give them. Culture does indeed influence politics, as Breitbart observed, and this book has detailed at length. But politics likewise influences culture, as even the most ardent disciple of the Breitbart doctrine will admit, if you ask him whether the Great Society programs of the 1960s affected crime and family structure among black Americans. A cursory look at religion in early 21st century Germany highlights the cultural consequences of government policy. According to a 2012 survey, the majority of East Germans are atheists, a proportion that falls to 10.3% among their godlier countrymen in West Germany. The regional differences among Germans run deeper than variations in bratwurst. From 1945 until 1990, an officially atheistic, communist government dominated East Germany. The previously Christian culture of that region did not flow downstream to convert the political system and the Soviet puppets who ran it. On the contrary, even after the communists' political regime collapsed, the culture of atheism that their political system had created remained. A neat and tidy distinction between politics and culture has never existed and never can exist in practice, because each influences the other. Any ideology that pretends to separate the two presupposes a narrow definition of politics, the very definition that has helped political correctness thrive. A people's politics and its culture describe much the same thing, how we all get along together. And that question always requires the articulation and enforcement of standards. Since censorship of conservative speech appears to be on the rise, it may be prudent to anticipate some objections to the arguments set forth in this book, lest its political incorrectness hasten its cancellation. I suspect the most frequent criticism this book will inspire is the charge of illiberalism, which I expect to come more from conservatives than progressives. In recent years, conservatives have tended to style themselves liberal, albeit of the classical 18th century variety, that they contend progressives have betrayed. Putting aside for a moment the wisdom of a conservative movement that values liberalism above all else, the charge of illiberalism falls flat. My most illiberal claim is that all societies necessarily have standards. Even the freest of speech regimes has limits. Has some more liberal writer suggested otherwise? John Milton, the most famous defender of free speech in the English language, called for the censorship of Catholics in his most influential apologia for free speech. I have never once suggested muzzling mackerel snappers, not least of all because then I would not be able to publish this book. If this book is illiberal, then Milton's Areopagitica is downright fascist. John Locke, the father of liberalism, argued in his letter concerning toleration that those are not at all to be tolerated who deny the being of a god. As I have demonstrated in this book, all regimes necessarily hold certain religious premises, but nowhere have I advocated the outright censorship of atheists. If my views are illiberal or intolerant, they are nevertheless more liberal and tolerant than the opinions that history's most influential liberal philosopher set forth in his treatise on toleration. Thus acquitted of illiberalism, I next expect my critics to charge me with propounding a conspiracy theory. It is ludicrous, they will argue, to trace gender-neutral bathrooms back to the prison notebooks of some Italian communist or the rantings of some deranged Austrian psychologist and his orgasm box. They will deny that Marxist philosophers ever considered matters of culture, as Wikipedia does when it defines cultural Marxism as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. They will deny the influence of certain thinkers upon others. They will deny the existence of political correctness itself. I fear that in this book I have, at times, made such extensive use of quotation and citation as to approach pedantry and dullness, and for that I beg the reader's forgiveness. But whatever damage those references have done to readability, they should preclude any credible claim of conspiracy theorizing. I anticipate a third and final objection from conservatives, particularly those steeped in the platitudinous shallows of late 20th and early 21st century political thought. They will complain that the acknowledgement and enforcement of standards would somehow make the right no different from the left. One expects this line of attack from the sort of conservative who gets a thrill out of losing with dignity. Like the critics who lobbed the first objection we described, these fretful conservatives fear that substantive moral vision will cost the right its liberalism, which they cherish above all other political qualities. Such critics misunderstand not just liberalism, as we have seen, but also politics more broadly, which involves not only form, but also substance. The same error presents itself when conservatives refer to members of Antifa as fascists. It is somewhat ironic that members of an organization that styles itself anti-fascist should employ the tactics of fascist blackshirts. But Antifa militants are not fascists. They are communists and anarchists. The groups may resemble one another in form, but they differ in their substantive visions for politics and government. The focus on form to the exclusion of substance has given rise to some of the glibest political arguments, typically involving some superficial observation followed by a reference to Adolf Hitler. Both Jack Dorsey and the Führer may have wielded power to suppress speech they found distasteful, but it does not therefore follow that Dorsey is a Nazi. The content of the speech they suppressed matters. George Washington and Hitler both saluted flags, but the flags they saluted represented different countries with different beliefs. Some future conservative movement that acknowledges the necessity of standards in public life will not thereby become left-wing. Standards are not an end unto themselves. The aim of the standards matters too. Both men and beasts make sounds. The latter can make only noise, but the former is capable of speech, a distinction that separates and elevates him above the rest of creation. This capacity for speech makes man the political animal. We use language to convey what we understand about the world and how we want to live in it. The process of persuasion and education that ensues from that act of speech constitutes politics. If we are to master our political future, we must not merely demand the right to speak. More importantly, we must have something to say.
And that was the conclusion, Back to Methuselah, of Speechless, Controlling Words and Controlling Minds by Michael Knowles, read by the author. And the one thing in this conclusion that jumped out at me was Marx saying criticize everything. That's what jumped out at me, because it's what they're doing is they're simply demanding that those of us that support the status quo, conservatives, that we justify the status quo, that we rationalize it, that we explain it, that we defend it. And the fact of the matter is that the status quo requires no defense. It does not require any defense. It is the people that want change. I read this in a book decades ago, and it was written in 1950, and it was about the rules of debate. And in the book, the author said that the first rule of debate is you make the presumption for the status quo. It doesn't mean you're married to it, but you make the presumption, because that's the starting place for any argument. Now, the left wants you to make the presumption for change, because that's going to get you to look for perfection. So that's what they do, is they come out with the attitude of why not? Now, how do we handle this? All the facts and figures aren't going to mean a damn thing. That's what they like to hear. They want to hear you waste your time on facts when it's so easy to win. You don't need the facts. All you need to do is start asking questions. For instance, what if somebody says to you, hey, we need to have third trimester abortions. They need to be legal. Now, what if instead of saying, no, that's murder, okay, instead of doing that, we said, that's fascinating. Tell me more. Okay, so, and then when they try to explain it, we ask more questions. The more they explain, the more questions we ask. We put them on the defensive. We make them explain. What would happen? How far do you think they would get sociopolitically with anything? They wouldn't. They would fail. So, and that's what Michael Knowles is missing with this whole book. And a lot of would-be conservatives that are missing this idea that Marxism is really more about technique than about content. It's all about technique for gaining power. Now, fortunately for us, Marx didn't include ideas about what to do when they gain. When you as a lefty, if you actually gain power, what you're supposed to do with it. So that's why we see that the left in power is completely and utterly incompetent. They don't get anything done. They get nothing done. Matter of fact, they backfire. Their ideas, their goals backfire. So, but anyways, it's the easiest way to defeat these people is by simply asking questions. Why not? Who cares? Well, I do. Why? See, right now, after you've asked that why question, now they're the ones that have to explain. If they come back and say, well, you're just being, a capitalist stooge. Are you sure? How do you know? Again, always keep them on the defensive. And we do that by simply asking questions. Just as easy as that. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Donald Trump.
Any other country, by far, and yet we're at the bottom of the list. Out of 40, we're ranked about number 40. And I'm going to close the Department of Education and move education back to the states. And we're going to do it fast. Maybe I'll have you do that. I'll use Lee. Maybe I'll have you. You can do it. That's not too easy. We'll get somebody great. We'll get Lee Zeldin is here with us tonight. I think that's the job for Lee. Everyone will prosper. Every family will thrive, and every day will be filled with opportunity and hope. But for that to happen, we must defeat Comrade Kamala Harris. And we must stop her country-destroying liberal agenda once and for all. You must get out and vote. You have to get out and vote. Everyone here, promise me I'll vote. We want a landslide that's too big to rig.
For my country, you know, we have to make America great again. We have to take it back. And you know, the things that the Democrats are doing is outrageous. And if you are really paying attention, you know the truth. Vote for Trump. Woo! Voting for Trump.
Hey, better economy, better gas. I'm sorry, cheap gas, cheap groceries, cheap rent. People have to live out here. Come on now, let's be real.
I need food in my house.
Period.
Under his administration, everybody was living well. Everybody was squatting. Me myself, working at Chick-fil-A, making only $12 an hour.
My pleasure.
My pleasure. I was able to pay for my student loans and all my bills.
Period. Voting for Trump.
I need more groceries in my house.
Period says voting for Trump.
And I like to keep money in my pocket because it's affordable.
That's right. Woo!
Listen, this election is not about race, it's not about ethnicity. It's about who's qualified to run this country. Stop looking at who's black, who's not, and vote for Trump. Kamala is not qualified. Whatever she's promising you that she would do, she would have did in the 3.5 years she was already in office. Vote Donald Trump and don't be brainwashed by fake news and these politicians and these liberals.
Yes. Vote early. Vote early. Please stand. No mail-in. No mail-in. No mail-in. Go for Trump. 2024. It is mandatory. It is a must that you vote for Trump.
Enough reason to not go into a women's locker room. Now walk with me. The left really said, we're not going to argue about the economy anymore. Let's instead call everyone a bigot who thinks that there should be common sense boundaries between men and women. And if anybody should be mad, it's the OG feminists who fought for civil rights protections, women's spaces, women's sport leagues. But biological men have convinced you new age feminists that the word woman holds no real meaning, so women's spaces are now rated E for everybody and their wig-wearing daddies. And maybe I'm brainwashed, but if the WNBA lowers the hoop and uses a smaller ball because of biological differences between men and women, then why are we pretending like biological men don't have an advantage in women's sports? Y'all have been so open-minded that your common sense slipped right out. It's all about women's right to choose until a woman chooses to not see testicles in the locker room.
I was going to vote for Trump, and then I saw that the IRS union endorsed Kamala. That really pushed me over the edge, and now I think I'm going to side with the people that robbed me blind and vote for Kamala. These idiots. Why did they even post this? They should have thrown this so far under the rug.
I don't see people talking about a whole bunch is driving through Springfield, Ohio. I am terrified to drive my car through Springfield, Ohio. It is a scary place to drive your car through. They do not know what lane to turn from. They do not know any traffic laws. Now, I did go into the DMV a couple days ago, and the workers were talking about there are a lot of them trying to at least figure it out and learn the law and stuff like that. So that's good. That's a good thing. Another thing that I do hate about living here right now is it is dangerous going through your store. I've been, I don't ever hear a lot of women talking about this, but when I do talk to women about this, they do bring it up and they do say the same thing. So I know I'm not the only one, but I've been stalked through stores by Haitian men. It's to the point where I would tell them, like, hey, stop fucking following me. And it's not like, oh, you're just being nervous. They ain't really following you. Yes, bitch, they're following me. If you go to the milk aisle, go to the freaking detailing section, and go to the toy section, and go to the toilet seat aisle, go to the dog food aisle, and they're same ones who are following you around, they're stalking you. They're stalking. So I always tell them, I let them know that I know that they're stalking me. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but anymore, I do not go to the grocery store by myself. If I do go by myself, I'm on the phone with somebody, I'm watching my surroundings, and best believe I have something on me. So that also sucks. Another thing that I've fell in love with the gym. The gym has been my second home. Here lately, I just can't really stand going into the gym. There's some days where I have to wrap a jacket around my waist to feel comfortable going into my gym. It is a unisex gym. There's men and women there. But I've never really felt like I wasn't welcomed in my own gym. I will say that. That's one of the things I hate about the biggest thing the biggest thing I do hate about it right now is the gym right now. But, you know, they're in there working on themselves. That's good. But when they're in there watching women to the point where they're rubbing their junk and stuff, it's gross. It's giving foul. It's giving nasty. It's giving get the fuck out of my gym. So that's also going on.
Let's be very clear. I am running for president to help the illegal immigrants. Because we have more in common than what separates us, and what separates us is the unburden of what has been and what has not. The 3 million homes that I plan on building are for the illegal immigrants because they need help the most. And also, I have no policy in place. No foreign policy for the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. And let's be clear. Let's be very clear. I meant what I said, that I'm not going to do anything specifically for black people, including reparations. So we need to move forward to destruction and crime. Because we love crime and we love chaos.
Asking people, when was the moment that they came to the conclusion Donald Trump is racist? A lot of people said Essential Part 5. We'll talk about that in another video. For me personally, it was the very fine people on both sides thing.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
I remember seeing that clip and feeling like, wow, maybe he is racist. And I just happened to come across this video on YouTube. It basically said that the clip was edited and that I should go back and watch the entire clip. So I watched the entire thing. It got to that point where he says very fine people on both sides. And I'm like, see, that's exactly, I knew he said that. There's no point in me even continuing to watch this. And then it goes on and it gets to the part where he's like,
And I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
So he said he wasn't talking about the neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Why would they show me part of the story and make me feel like this? Even in the presidential debate against Joe Biden, he brought up the very fine people thing.
He said, I think they're fine people on both sides. What American president would ever say, Nazis coming out of fields carrying torches, singing the same anti-Semitic bile, carrying swastikas, were fine people?
Kamala Harris just brought it up on the recent debate.
Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side.
People are still saying it even though it's been debunked. Snopes just added this shit in 2024 that was a lie. He supposedly said in 2017 he dropped out of a presidential race because white supremacists joined his same party.
I'm not going to be running. The party is, as you know, self-destructing.
When you say the party is self-destructing, what do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Of our own party to the other side. Now, for the second time this week, a Democrat is ditching the Democrat Party and coming on the angle to explain why.
In this Capitol behind me, I served as both Senate Democratic Caucus Chair and the Senate Majority Leader. But today I say goodbye. Adios. I've had enough. I changed my voting registration today.
And that was Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to trust yourself and trust your conscience.